Okay, so 10 o'clock, so we can start. So I'm very happy to introduce today Julian Zapata, who comes from Toronto. He's an assistant professor in translation studies at the Department of Languages, Literatures and Cultures at Toronto Metropolitan University, Canada. And I know Julian already for 10 years now. We discussed yesterday, and he was on a couple of translation process research events that we organized 10 years ago. Yeah. And then we met again to other parts of the world on conferences and so on. And he is, right from the beginning, he was always interested in how translators can speak their translation, and had a very interesting idea. So I'm very happy to look forward to your presentation today.
Thank you, Mike. Just to get confirmed, online people are with us, are they hear us? Just before I start talking, they stop us. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
All right. Let's see if this is. Okay. So welcome for the people in the room, and Michael for having who decided to take an hour of your time to join this presentation. I'm not sure I'd be standing on the side. I don't know if they are looking at me now, or just the screen. Anyway, so if you can see the screen, you don't need to see me. But yeah, so I'm going to be some thoughts today. Do you need to admit people in?
I don't know. Just go on with your.
All right. Okay. So just before I get started, I just want to give a little bit of just say that we've known each other for 10 years, and I like to think that I've been a translation process researcher. And one particular aspect of the translating process, which is the writing part, so somewhat I'm a little bit also like a writing process researcher. And when people ask me like, what is that TPR? And I like to put it simply for people saying that it's about, so in the case of translation process research, it's about it's about translate. There is maybe
Somebody can switch off their microphone.
Switch off
there.
I'm not. Oh no, you're not. Okay, so all right. So translation process research being about how translators work and understanding why they do what they do and how they do it. Right? It's a little bit of an easy way to put it. So I've been interested in that for a few years. So, and I did a little bit of research for my PhD, like proposing that part of the translating process can be reinvented. And that's basically what I wrote in my PhD thesis, and I suggested multimodal input and the use of speech technologies for translating purposes. So this work that I'm doing, so I'm a new professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University, and between the time I finished my PhD and my appointment at the university, I was a little bit of an entrepreneur. So I was pursuing a project that was kind of a continuation of my PhD degree, and I did the need to reinvent how translators input text. But I also identified that people want to do this. The voice application technologies have come to a point where this can seriously be considered, but they don't know how to use it, and they don't know how to speak. They don't know how to do side translations and translation dictations and use the technologies. So that work that I did was kind of to develop a training and a training platform online for people to learn to dictate and use speech technology. So that's kind of specifically for translation. So this project is early stage because I think that not only translators, but anyone who writes, and that's all of us basically, and most importantly, academics and students at university and professional writers, and of course, us translators, we can still with better ways to create text. And this is something we call text entry in the field of human-computer interaction. And now, with what I've learned with professional translators, I've also kind of discovered that we need to rethink text entry, not only for major languages, but also for multiple languages, and particularly languages for which the conventional keyboard was not designed, right? So we're going to talk about all these concepts in my presentation. And I want to start today with a quote that I really enjoy from Toffler, who says, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." So we tend to think that we are always learning something new as life goes, but sometimes we forget that in order for us to learn, to make room for that learning, we also have to unlearn certain things. But there are also things that as a society we used to be able to do and we used to know that we no longer, and that we can always consider bringing those things back. And we're gonna talk about that. So learning and unlearning and relearning are very important for us. And when we talk about text entry, which has really become a staple in component in modern communication. So of course we produce text and we do so through whatever text entry or mode we have available in computers today. And sometimes when we envision someone writing, and when you actually describe someone writing, we cannot really see. This is very there's a lot of light here. If you see on screen, there is a keyboard, right? So we often think of writing. This is what we do, like people, this is how we actually represent keyboard, right? So the use of a keyboard. And we also forget that actually there's been a lot of research that has been, into the use of keyboarding, right? And the use of the keyboards. And I, of course, did not set a keyboard on fire for this picture. I actually had to pay royalties to use this. I pay like $15 because I think it's a great picture. It's a good investment. But this goes to show that, there's also been big movement in research to demonstrate that the keyboard isn't necessarily the best way to input text. There's also been research about not only reinventing how we interact with computers and we input text entry methods, but also to reinvent work environments, right? So we're no longer seeing these traditional office cubicles, and which are necessarily characterized by the personal computer, which it's necessarily characterized by the keyboard and the mouse. And we're starting to see some experimental work environments as well. So this is Microsoft Envisioning Center. And this is kind of a work environment. So this is actually a research lab. And so you see different ways of working, different movable furniture, and nice designs, and different kinds of computer interfaces you can interact with in different. People can decide, what position to take and to change that and use different devices. And you see nothing here that looks like that conventional cubicle or those conventional computers that necessarily have a keyboard and a mouse. So there are other ways, and there have always been other ways of writing. Right? And of course, with the evolution of writing tools, we've adapted and we have implemented and adopted different tools. So let's go back to that title of this presentation, is that back to basics thing. And this is kind of something we've been hearing about for of years, and more now in the age of generative artificial intelligence. But for, schools have been kind of talking about going back to basics, meaning, and I highlighted, this is one example of a news story from I think it's Sweden. And I highlight professors are willing to spend more time on, and then less time on tablets, independent online research, and less time on keyboarding skills. So going back to basics, meaning going as we used to do before digital and before computers and before, of course, the keyboard. So more handwriting. And this is something else, like in school, they also talk about even before kids start to write, we can start, having them create stories through voice and to dictate and to kind of orally, produce and do a bit of storytelling. This is a skill you can develop at very early ages. So still going back to basics, and I'm going to put these images here as a background. So this is John Milton, famous writer, several paintings about him writing through speaking, meaning that he is dictating and somebody else is doing the transcription, right? So he would simply produce text and his novels, and I can tell you a little bit more. Actually, this is part of the research I've conducted this year, a little bit of historical digging, and with my research assistant, we have been able to a little bit of like a historical overview of dictation throughout history. And actually, we traced it back all the way to Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago. And we learned about all these writers in history who have been speaking or dictating as opposed to physically write themselves, right? So you will read about it in a forthcoming paper, but it's been interesting to see that this is not something new. So when we talk about going back to basics, we could literally be talking about basics as in this is how we used to write before is through voice, by speaking. And in research, I've kind of, for the purposes of translation and, translation practice in general, I've been kind of looking at the typing process from a business perspective. So I came to discover this lean thinking and lean philosophy that is very common in manufacturing. And basically what is lean? So from lean.org is about creating processes that need less human effort, less space, less capital, and less time to make products and services. And I highlighted that those two, human effort and time, right? So we need to spend less time. And this lean philosophy actually was inspired from the Japanese sensei masters who would challenge the managers at car manufacturing companies back in the 50s in Japan. And they would challenge them to look at the workplace differently. So it's a little bit like what in process research is look at what people do, their workflows and the work conditions, and reinvent that and consider the human, right? Consider the people who's doing the work, take into consideration what they do, how they feel, the ideas they have, and implementing those. Also, understanding that in order to have a good product, which is something we aim for in our industry and in any industry, you need to have happy people doing that work, people who are not frustrated with the tools and the things they're using to get that work done, and understanding that they're necessarily built at every step of the process. And idea of Kaizen in Japanese is change for the better. So implementing changes little by little, as opposed to trying to make like a huge leap forward. And one of the mantras of this lean philosophy is eradicate waste, eradicate waste, eradicate waste. That's to eliminate the barriers that slow down or impede the flow. So by eradicating waste, employees can focus their effort and time, remember those two that I highlighted earlier, on producing high quality work. So whenever you have time, not today, but you can kind of start thinking about that effort and time you put into typing, and whether you can start seeing this as a wasteful practice that needs to be eradicated. And this is a very simple tool you can find on a website called 10 Fast Fingers. So what you get is some sort of a karaoke-like interface. Of course, in writing process research and in translation process research, you have specialized software to collect this kind of data. How fast can you type? How many mistakes do you make, etc., etc. But this tool itself, just based on 1 minute of typing, it's going to give you some data, right, about your typing skills, measured in words per minute, which I don't think is a very accurate way to measure speed and accuracy. So we're mostly interested in the number of keystrokes. So in this case, for 1 minute of typing, 31 words per minute, that's the result I got when I typed. And, so you get a number of keystrokes, and then the green number is the number of correct keystrokes. And I still have like a 24, that's all the mistakes I made, which show me a percentage of my accuracy. So how many of my typing activity is wasted ever, right? So a big 17% only for 1 minute of typing. And of course, in writing process research, we kind of collect this data on larger, typing sessions, etc. And we can actually see we can actually measure all the waste that is involved in typing process. So that's one way to look at typing activity. And this is another way I propose, is to look at the big gap that there is between typing and speaking. And this kind of becomes super interesting actually when you're considering other languages. So most of my research is done in French, but also Spanish. And what I propose with this new research is to start, looking into other languages as well. So this is just one example from French. So when we look at, the effort you need to type Monsieur Vignon, so you need 9 for Monsieur, Shift M for the capital M, that's already 2, ONSIEUR, spacebar, that's 1 keystroke. But then you have Monsieur Vignon, right? That's an excellent example. It's a last name, right? You need Shift V, of course. And then you have IGN. GN, that's 1 sound. And then EAULT, that's 1. That's O. So it's 5 letters you have to write, therefore type. And it's just 1 sound, right? So this is actually a small example, but with more experiments, I have come also to conclude for French, almost always you need twice as many keystrokes as you need speech sounds. Might sound stupid, but when you're actually measuring this and even comparing this with a person's own typing speed and accuracy, then you start to it starts to become super interesting, and you're starting to be able to see that huge gap that there is between simply speaking and typing, getting anything on paper. So with research that I've conducted, I have come to realize, but mostly for French, but I'm starting to have conversations with colleagues about it, etc. But at least for French, the findings of my studies where I have collected typing data, among other data that I have collected, but for typing sessions with professional translators in French, but we're not talking about translating tasks, just writing, having people, make their own typing. 10% of the typing is just hitting the space bar. So 10% of the total type keystrokes are space bar. That's a lot. Up to 35%, between 15 and that's a third of all your typing that is deleting, correcting typos, and arrow key. All these aren't really necessarily like text entry, but these are still like wasted keyboard keystrokes in a sense that they're not really adding anything. And that's a lot, a third of your day if you're typing for 6 hours, 2 full hours where, correcting typos. And with the translators, I've observed up to 7 times, but on average, 3-4 times more time to type something they can simply read out loud or naturally speak. So I have done it with translators, but there's no translation test. Basically, do this in any English for anyone. Can we compare how much time you take to type this text and how much you take it to read it? And that could be even bigger number for other languages. I've also found that people, have a lot to say and complain about their keyboards, and people get very uncomfortable when they have to type on a new keyboard all of a sudden. So someone who would say, I used to be faster, but not anymore because I had another keyboard. Now that I have this new one, I'm not as fast. Or maybe they're unlearning to type. People, when you ask them, can you do a typing test? Ooh, very bad. Exactly. And people who, can you do this typing test in your language? Persian, Chinese, Croatian, I have no idea. I cannot because I don't have my keyboard. This is not my computer, or, this keyboard doesn't have. And then they go and why these conventional keyboards that we have in front of us today are not really necessarily the best text entry method. And people just refuse to type because they are not designed for that. And this is something I've been observing more and more in the past couple of years, at least, because we went back to the classroom, and I've been observing that the younger university students now, they're slower and slower for some reason. Like maybe my generation, we learned to type more, but I personally, I've become slower and slower myself. But the newer students too, right? So I have them collect this typing data, and when I go around and observe, I go like, oh, this isn't like 10 years ago. Like, these are very slow typists, and they're coming from schools and that way, and that's normal. And it's normal too, because they're now the mobile device generation, right? They're more swiping and even speaking their text messages, and they're more and more touch-based text entry modalities. So Augusto says that, this is just one example of the many research studies out there that have really focused and proved that the conventional keyboard is a major impediment for cognition, creativity, productivity, and well-being. And today, of course, we have an opportunity to rethink of all this now that we live in the age of ubiquitous computing. So devices all over the place. People own several devices themselves that are already touch-based, and different kinds of interactions through touch, speech, and of course, cloud-based. And so we're really looking at a different era of computing now. I want to play this video. Don't worry, I don't have audio, but I think this is a good 2-minute break for me right now. But this comes from a movie, Bruce Almighty, where Bruce kind of gets all the powers of God, and at some point he has to, interact with a PC, and I'll play it for 2 minutes. I think it's fun, but we'll comment on it. So that's one example that even when you're almighty, of course, he was like doing a lot of typing of necessarily performing a task that required the keyboard, right? And at some point, like he's God, now he's okay, let me just go through a shortcut or create a macro, right? Which created a problem, and you need to watch the movie to see the problem it created. But I really wonder, like now we're living this generative artificial intelligence, and I don't know, maybe, we have this enough, and it's same is true for machine translation and post editing, is that, yeah, we're basically subconsciously willing to integrate it and bring that into our lives because we can't take the physical typing anymore, the physical writing or that. So maybe I'm reading a book on subconscious, and I think it will be interesting to see if, this may be a reason why we're, willing to, integrate these new technologies into our lives. But yeah, maybe we're just sick of the traditional way of creating texts, and maybe we still reinvent this and see how we can better integrate these technologies. And then the part where we come in, we don't necessarily have to depend on the traditional input modes. So I think we need more research in more languages. Basically, yes, the keyboard was developed for English, has been adapted to languages, but not necessarily considering, non-alphabetic languages. And then, so with my research assistant and I have been conducting some literary review of the literature to actually start to understand how other languages input text, right? So how they enter text, right? And we can start collecting data a little bit like I've done for French and Spanish. How about we start, seriously, collecting typing activity data for other languages that are not necessarily English or the major languages of the world? How about non-Latin alphabet languages like Japanese, Arabic, Persian, Chinese, even indigenous language? And how have they written up until now, or even before computers, and how are they entering tests right now? Can we think from them for us, and what kind of observations can we do now with those languages, and how is the speech recognition technology doing for those languages? Because if it's already at a point where starting to make sense to simply orally produce our text and use the technology to do the transcription. So it's time we start, looking into research and development that effectively integrates this technology. Also, inclusion and accessibility. Of course, most of the times we think of inclusion and accessibility, we think of people with disabilities. And of course, this is one major application, is that not everybody is physically able to type on a conventional mechanical keyboard. But also be aware that accessibility and inclusion is not always about disabilities, but sometimes, yes, disabilities, yes, they can be permanent, but also be circumstantial or temporary. So I may not be a disabled person, but sometimes I'm unable to type. So it's nice to kind of propose this to the research on text entry, is that can we observe and learn about different situations where people may not be able to type, offer them as alternative to typing. And another area of potential research is second language acquisition and writing skills development. So for instance, some of the research we've been learning in the literature review on, second language acquisition has been shown that through implementing speech recognition technology activities in second language, so students focus more on their pronunciation, their fluency, they develop vocabulary. So some research has actually proved that there is potential with having students who are learning language use speech technologies and focus more on the speaking rather on the physical typing. And of course, we're talking about ChatGPT a lot and all the friends of ChatGPT, also all the friends or enemies, but technologies alike that are doing the writing for us. So maybe there is potential, like innovation. And then if we're going back to basics in schools, elementary, secondary, and even post-secondary institutions, how about maybe we start, focusing more on speaking skills and having people produce more texts and thoughts and, through or means, right? So I believe the evolution of text-centric methods should be a dynamic process driven by the imperative to accommodate linguistic diversity, ensure accessibility, and enhance user experiences. But the technology advances, rethinking multiple languages can ultimately foster a more inclusive and connected global society. So we just finished going back to that last, to that quote from the beginning. I think, yes, we need to continuously learn, integrate these new technologies, but of course, we're necessarily talking about something that is entirely new, right? So dictation and spoken communication has been around for longer than we can think. This is probably something we as a society, we can relearn, right, to do. It was common, and why not? Why are we not doing? And of course, this is necessarily gonna mean that we need to unlearn to type, right? Because we're so dependent on it, and we're just not willing to make room for this new kind of skill and leave this behind. But I think now with the technology, at least for major languages, and you're gonna see the list of languages that can, have very powerful speech recognition engines right now is getting longer and longer. So it's time we start, looking into how well are those languages doing, and if they're doing really well. So let's start looking at opportunities to start giving people, speakers of those languages, the opportunity to use. And of course, continuously learn. So we need to, teach them how to speak text, how to use these technologies. So I think this creates a nice opportunity for us in writing process research, and particularly, of course, in translation process, because, writing is part of the process, but also speech technologies can become super useful tool also at different stages of the translation process, not only at the dictation or the text production step, but also, looking up information through voice and doing editing and post-editing through voice as well. These are things that have been proposed and even experimented on, So I think this is still like very early stage for, this particular project. But I'm looking forward to having more discussions in ideas. And of course, I don't speak all the language which I would like to collect data in. So if people have initiatives to kind of collaborate and then contribute, and then we could, run experiments with your languages and something like that. So I'm very open to having those conversations with researchers and people interested in this topic in particular. So thanks again. Merci beaucoup, muchas gracias, and my email is there if you want to get in touch. And thank you so much, and I look forward to having some time for conversation today. Yeah, all right.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you
for all those in the room. So do we need to?
Yeah, thank you, Julian. And if there is a question from online participants, then just speak up.
We can remove the slides if need be so that we can do
Okay. So question here. Oh, wow, very long comment. Oh, no, this is what the transcription of your. Oh, yeah. Okay, any question?
I have a question. I'm not sure if they can hear me online, but my first question was about, you talked about the integration of voice recognition in the translation process. Are you specifically referring to such as with Trados? Currently, Trados does not really have or utilize voice recognition when you want to input translation. So referring to maybe integrating voice recognition in translation software or CAT softwares such as Travis.
So the question is about, so for the people online, the integration, specific integration of speech applications to the CAT tools, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's been interest of, in my earlier study at the master's, people wanting to use combined speech recognition software with CAT tools.
Mhm.
And if I can mention software specifically, like back in the early or in the 2000s, people wanted to combine Dragon Naturally Trados, right?
Mhm.
But those are like two software that at least 15 years ago, with the computational power the machines had
Yeah.
back then, the software that running in parallel, to put it simply, would crash the computer, crash the system, because it's a very too powerful, very tools. So people were frustrated. So they wanted this, but they were frustrated with the software crashing. So some recent applications, and particularly those that are cloud-based, have been integrating some also cloud-based speech technologies, right? No longer installed on the computer. So yeah, there's been some effort. I don't know about specific tools, how they're doing with integrating the technology, but I know some CAT tools have, been able to integrate speech input. There was a project back in the day with Michael and the team.
Mhm.
I was looking at a CAT tool for that had a little microphone and the possibility to have a cloud speech engine working parallel with it, so
Yeah.
that people could do the post editing and the translating on the platform with their voice.
Okay. More questions, but I can let the team. ask the question first. There's one team. Can they still hear us?
Is there, okay, how can I, let me see.
Is that a question? Any tools?
I'm not in the team.
Okay.
I don't know whether they.
Well, then, yeah, go ahead with your question.
Okay.
There is one here though.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
I'm curious to know if you need any specific speech recognition tool for your research and review.
So the question is, thank you for your presentation. I'm curious to know if you used any specific speech recognition tools for your research, and if any proved more useful, efficient than others.
So for the study, I had some applications, because for my experiment, I had a touchscreen computer, Windows based, and I had an Android tablet, and people were interacting. So with the touchscreen computer, I was using Dragon. For this tablet, an application called Dragon Swipe. So it's also Dragon, but it's no longer available. It's been discontinued. And people were also using Google's speech application as well. So I tried a few. It's been a few years. And now we're looking at integrating and looking at experimenting with the applications that even Microsoft Word have been making available, the dictate tool on Word. I have been personally blown away by the performance of the Google in the Google
Yeah.
tool,
Yeah.
and which I also use on my Gboard on my phone. Dragon is still a great tool, but the one you have to install on your computer is limited to one language at a time. So you still need to switch between two languages, and you can always get one software. And that's of course so there are pros and cons. So I don't necessarily recommend one specifically, but I'm looking forward to testing different applications now, and particularly in other languages, because I think for English, French, Spanish, we've seen, they can perform, and they can perform really. For us to really question whether we should still be typing in those languages, but I still want to learn more about, how they're doing in other languages. Mhm.
I guess I have two questions. Okay, my next question, that's okay.
Yeah, there's one more question in the room. So for the people online, I think they're still typing, but
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. My next question is about what you're arguing specifically. So the background information you provided was so superb, it was excellent. But what is your argument? Is your argument basically stating that we need to start streamlining voice recognition into the translation process that will eventually hopefully replace keyboards? Or are you saying that not only is there voice recognition, but there's probably other alternatives to keyboards that we can start using? What is it that you're arguing?
It's a little bit of both. So the question is whether I think if I reformulate, whether I believe speech recognition is the only way to go.
Kind of, what are you proposing exactly?
So I think what this is kind of teaching us is that there are other things out there. So I think it's a little bit more towards the second part of your question is like alternatives and learning how and when to use them and when not to use them, right? Because not every situation is of course eligible for dictation. Not every place you cannot necessarily always dictate, and always the disability or temporary disability that applies for your hands can also apply for your voice. Like what if you have a sore throat and you cannot dictate today? But it becomes an option. So I think this is more about learning that there are other options and learning to identify when to use it, when not to use it, and how. But yeah, of course. So one of the other things is like those swipe keyboards on phones and tablets that are like you go like super fast with your finger. So that's another way to input text, like super fast. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to physically slaving away. Exactly. So that's one more option. And what else can we learn? What else can we, propose? And is there I think there's a question. You wanna think on in there a copy.
Okay. So it's one question from Graciela. Thanks for your interesting presentation regarding the example you gave between number of strokes and sounds in French, 20 strokes versus 9 sounds. Have you timed the difference between the two? So I guess, does it take to type that?
Exactly. So with this example, so I use it as an example of this gap, and that's when I connect it to. It's depend on each person. So that's why I have people like collect data about their own typing so that they can reflect how much their typing precision, accuracy, and speed has also an additional impact on that gap. So just to answer the question, yes, it can be measured that way, like difference between speech sounds and keystrokes. And to that you can add, so you like collect larger samples with more text and actually like decide, like for different people, for each individual, it's going to be necessarily dramatically different, the typing speed, but is the speaking part is when it's more homogeneous, right?
Yes.
People tend, so let's take 200-word text or something like that, which is something I've done like experiments with. So people take 5.5, 6 minutes to type it and 1.5 minutes to read it, right? And you could basically explain this gap by, first of all, the gap that there is between typing and speaking, keystrokes versus speech sounds, but also the person's own typing activity and performance. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you so much.
All right, there was a couple more questions.
Yeah, so there's more questions here. From Megan Carter. Thank you for your presentation. I was wondering what you would recommend in terms of implementing speech recognition software in the translation classroom. Are there programs that might be more accessible for students while keeping cost in mind? What are best practices that you would recommend for using speech recognition in the translation classroom?
So I'm glad you're asking this question, which I cannot answer today, because that's exactly the project I had been working on since my PhD until now, and I'm still working on it, which is the development of a training. And implemented it in the classroom. We have run workshops. I've done this at different universities with my own students, and I've been kind of a guest lecturer at universities where, you know, we can do like a 3-hour session or 4-hour session, 6 hours. We've done, say, with an institute in France, just to give you an example. And so we go about how to implement this. So the exact question you're asking, that's what we've been investigating. And when I say we, it's really with a team and several teams actually of students, master students who have kind of conducted research about the pedagogy of translation dictation and how to better integrate this technology. So we propose different alternatives. We propose questions for reflection exercises that have progressive level of difficulty. So from very simple exercises to very complicated ones, and then we go about and explore different applications and discuss the pros and cons of each. So that's a little bit of a self-advertisement there, but yes, if you are interested in exploring this further, I encourage you to get in touch with me. But yeah, you have questions and I have answers.
Yeah, so there's another question from Dana Mahadin. I think it would also be interesting the satisfaction of translators when using speech to text versus typing. Was that also included in the research experiment? So what was your satisfaction?
So yeah, of the many experiments actually we've done, so if I speak of the PhD experiment, for instance, so one of proposed as a notion was that of translator experience as a kind of our own version of the user experience, which is a concept based on human-computer interaction that goes well beyond just measuring usability, and it's actually learning about how people feel, you know. So it's really looking at the subjective aspect of interaction. So the translator experience, yes, measures the interaction, the task, collects objective, quantitative data, but also looks into the people's perception of the interaction. So it's their feelings, but it's also sometimes, so if you're going to measure if a person was faster, translator experience or concept of user experience looks at whether the person felt that they were faster, right? And you can triangulate this data, and you can actually observe that people may not necessarily be always faster, depending on the task, but if they feel they were, it's a plus for the setup, right? They may feel they're faster, they may feel the quality of the output is good, so you can objectively also measure whether the result of the interaction was better or not necessarily better or slightly better or not. But if people feel that they was better, that's a plus for the experimental environment, right? So yes, there is a consideration of people's satisfaction with it. We've done some other experiments. We did one that we presented at the Machine Translation Summit in Nagoya with a couple of colleagues in Dublin City University and whether people were post-editing faster through speech, but they also whether how they felt about post-editing through speech. So we did a little pilot experiment with Spanish with several participants, and this is one of the cases where we saw that just the fact that people were happy and enthusiastic about this type of interaction, it was a bonus for the proposed experimental setup. So yeah, just to answer the question, yes, there was consideration of the users, and it shows that the research shows that people are at least looking forward to more.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you think there is scenarios where this might be more appropriate and others where it's not? For instance, if there is a difficult text and a translator needs to look up. So I assume spoken translation or spoken would be suited for texts that are quite fluent, that you can produce quite fluently, which are routinized texts, maybe, whereas others where you need to look up many things, or where maybe you need to reformulate, where you correct very much and so on, that might be less suited. Do you think it be true?
I think it might, and I think research will look into this. So yes, there are texts that are not really cut out for dictating, and I personally dictate most of the stuff that I write, but I do find some situations or times, or like this is to give you an example, like if you translate official documents, some of these things you need to write into the translated document are not necessarily well suited for dictating. So you type, you copy paste. That's an example, but there is also like another experiment we did with literary translators, where they go like, wow, I think this is the way to go. In literary, where it's so fluent, I have to be creative, I have to speak my mind out. And then I think I totally see myself going with a dictaphone to the park and book and sit there and do side translation and get super creative. And I think so this is like the other side of that story. It's like literary translation, but anything that is well suited for dictation, we are yet to be to confirm which are those text types and situations this is ideal for, and those that are not. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I remember I recently had a mail exchange with another fellow, and I got back a mail, and I was struggling to understand this. And then I asked him, "What do you mean?" And then he said, "Oh, I use a speech recognition system," and he dictates the mails, the answers, and it was a wrong recognition and a completely wrong word and rendering. So
maybe they're relying too much on it. And maybe that's something that part of the training
also, no?
Training and experiment with students is to kind of recognize how you should enunciate and pronounce so that the recognition is better, and how to go about with revising, and whether you can still revise with your voice or but and you can even you have a text that even has a few that are transcription errors, but that are sometimes caused by the user. It's not the system that didn't get it, it's just that you weren't able to pronounce or speak the whole sentence in one shot so that the system would understand you better. But even in those cases, can you still it with your voice and combine the speech recognition and the keyboard still, even for revising, but whether you can do this much faster. So yeah, so I think it's a big area. Were there more?
No. Some more questions from here? No.
Go.
Thank you. There was one.
I thought you had a question.
No,
Oh,
no.
I did have another follow-up question, which was about, so my specialty is Japanese. By the way, you were talking about Asianic languages. I think it'd be particularly interesting to view, especially Japanese or Mandarin, because in order to even for the word itself, you have to press the space bar so many times, you put in the sound, and then you select the correct logograms. So I think that would be very interesting to see how much delay there is and how much waste would be reduced, kind of going back to your Kaizen.
Yeah,
So I guess the other question is what your current, where you are at your current present stage of your research, what do you think your next step is in the next stage?
Next stage. So there was just for the people online commenting on how interested this could be for languages like Japanese. The person in the room specializes in Japanese, and yes, of course, I think what you bring up is one of those things that, you know, how many keystrokes do you need? And you're giving an example like hitting the space bar so many times so that you can see the proper characters appear and write. In the literature review conducted like as early as yesterday, as recent yesterday or something like that, or this week, we've been learning how else do the Japanese enter texts on mobile devices, for instance, you know, with pen, you know.
Writing the character.
You're writing character and then some context awareness, some artificial intelligence that kind of knows what you're trying to write. Then it will still suggest, anyway, something like that for the first comment. And as far as next steps, of course, all this will involve participation of humans. But I think for me personally, because I'm teaching in the Department of Languages, so I want to kind of start collecting data with students and or profs in languages other than English, right? And, you know, just like something as simple as learning about their typing in those languages and typing skill, speed, accuracy, and whether, you know, they're still, you know, their spoken skills are already at a level where, you know, they could still integrating this into their writings and in a foreign language. So I think that's the next experiment, is to collect data in multiple languages, or at least for those languages that we teach, you know, Department Chinese, Arabic, more, which is an indigenous language of Canada, French and Spanish. But still, maybe as a control, I still want to collect for the English, right? Even though we have a lot of data for English already, but I still want to collect the data for English and then see the contrast when is a non-English. Yeah.